Connecting data analytics software. Exporting data. At some point, you might need to export your data into a flat file and then use it with your data analytics software. For small data sets, this approach is reasonable. There are two easy ways for exporting data into a flat file. The first is to use an import and export data wizard, which comes with the SQL Server distributive. You can find the wizard shortcut under the Microsoft SQL Server folder in your Windows program list. Choose the version that is appropriate to your systems, 32 or 64 bits. Once the wizard is open, click the Next button. And choose your data source. For the SQL Server, you can choose the SQL Server native client. Version 11 will work. Then click on the Server Name drop-down menu and select your SQL Server instance. For the server authentication, use the same method you used to connect the Server Management Studio. If you were using your Windows authentication, then leave the authentication setting as it is. Now, click on the Database drop-down menu and select your database name. If you do not see your database in the list, then click Refresh button to the right. On the next screen, select the flat file as your destination. Then, enter the file name where you want to save your table data. In our example, we will save the data in a comma-separated value file named Table. We recommend using the locale and code page settings the same as you have in your database. If you want the wizard to convert the data into a different code page, you can change the code page options. We can also change the file format settings here. We will leave the default format, which is delimited columns without a text qualifier. We will also leave the checkbox marked. With that, the wizard will save the table column names in the first row of the file. Click Next. Now we can choose the table that we want to save in the flat file. Note that your data source can be either a table or a view. After the source is selected, we can set the row and column delimiters. The wizard suggests a selection of row delimiters. For the Windows operating system, we have to use both carrier return or CR and line feed or LF to make sure the table rows will be stored as separate lines. If you are going to use the file on Mac, then CR is enough. For Linux, your file will look good with only LF row delimiter. Comma is the natural column delimiter for the comma-separated value file. So we will leave the comma delimiter with the default value. We can preview the file content by clicking the Preview button. One more thing we can do at this step is to edit mappings. For example, we can change the column names in the destination file. Here we will rename column ticker to the stock ticker and click OK. On the next screen, the wizard gives us a choice either to start the data export process immediately or to save the export settings as a SQL Server Integration Services package. We want to run it immediately, and so we click Next. Finally, the wizard asks us to confirm that we want to finalize the export setting process. The export itself will start right after we click the Finish button. Upon successful completion, we will see a window with the list of all stages of the exporting process. If the process would fail, then with this report we could easily detect the stage where the failure occurred. Now let's locate the file with the exported data and open it with the notepad. The content of the file looks exactly as we expected. The columns are delimited with the commas, the first row has column titles, and the first column title is stock ticker, as we called it at the content mapping stage. Now, the second way for exporting data is way faster. However, it gives less control on the formatting of the exported data and is only good for relatively small sets of data. We are talking about simple copy-pasting of the reporting window in the SQL Server Management Studio. Firstly, using the select statement, we will retrieve all the table content into the reporting window. Then we just click with the left mouse button on the empty field next to the column names and select all the table content. After, we click with the right button on the same field and choose Copy with Headers from the context menu. Now we can paste the data into any text of Spreadsheet Editor. We will paste the data in the Notepad. As we can see, the buffer content was pasted as a tab-delimited table. It is perfectly fine to save the file as it is now. However, if we want to convert it to the comma-separated value file, then we can do some more manipulations. Select the tabulated space between columns and copy it to the buffer by pressing the Ctrl-C key. Then open Edit menu, choose Replace, and paste the buffer content into the Find What field. Enter comma sign in the Replace With field and click Replace All. With that, the Notepad will search for all tabulation signs in the file and replace it with commas. The result of these manipulations can be saved as a comma-separated value file. Alternatively, we could paste the copied content into Excel and get a spreadsheet with the SQL Server table. Connecting Excel with Graphical User Interface. Here we will show how to retrieve data from the database into Excel using Excel Graphical User Interface. We will use Excel 365, but the process is similar for all Excel versions. After the Excel is opened and we started a new blank worksheet, we can go to the Data menu. In the Data menu ribbon, we should click the Get Data icon, the first icon to the left. Then we select option From Database and choose From SQL Server Database. Excel will ask us to enter the SQL Server name and the database name. We will use the same name as we used for connecting the SQL Server Management Studio. The database name is the name of the database where our table is located. Since we use Windows credentials to log into the server, Excel will not ask further questions and show us the list of instances that it found in our database. The first instance in the list is our table of interest. We can select the table name and get the content preview to make sure that this is the table we want to import. Now all we need to do is to click Load. Excel will show that it is working on the loading data, and then output the table content. Note that in the default format, Excel shows the table with filters. We can continue working with the table content using filters or convert the table to the format most of us get used to. For that, we will select the whole spreadsheet, copy it to the buffer, and then paste it without formatting to the new spreadsheet. Connecting Excel with Visual Basic for applications. If you are doing a lot of analytics in Excel or developing an application, then most likely you will need to know how to connect SQL Server with Visual Basic for Application, or VBA. At first, you will need to activate the Developer menu, which is not active by default. For that, go to the File menu and click Options at the bottom of the left column. In the Options window, find Customize Ribbon option, check the box next to the Developer menu item, and click the OK button. Now you have the Developer menu activated. Go to the Developer menu and find View Code icon. Click it to open the VBA editor. The other way to open the editor is to press the Alt plus F11 key. In the editor window, the first thing you need to do is to go to the Tools menu and click References. In the Reference window, you need to make sure that two references are enabled: Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects Library and Microsoft ActiveX Data Object Extension for data definition, language, and security. In this example, we will use version 2.8 for both references. Now we will create a subroutine for connecting with our SQL server. We will need two set objects, connection and record set. The connection object will help us to set the connection with the server. The record set object will help us to retrieve data from the server. With the connection object, we will open a new connection with the server. For that, we need to pass the connection string to the object. Connection strings are nothing more than a list of parameters, a dictionary if you will, where we set values to certain variables. The list of variables depends on the driver that you want to use to connect with the server or the data provider. Here we will use the so-called SQL OLE DB data provider and instruct it to connect to our server LB Lenovo with Windows authorization and Open SMP 500 database. If you will use other database servers like Oracle or IBM or other drivers, the connection strings will be slightly different. Also, you might like to add more parameters like connection timeout and other. For most SQL Server connections, this connection string will work just fine. For the record set object, we will write the query that we want to execute and pass the connection object as a parameter. Lastly, we instruct our subroutine to output all data that we will retrieve from the server into our record set object to the very beginning of the active worksheet, the cell A1. Now we can close the editor and create new control element to run the VBA script. We go back to the Developer menu and find the Insert icon. We want to insert a new button, which is the first item in the list of the form controls. After the button is placed, Excel suggests to assign a macro that this button will execute. We select our subroutine as the macro for the button. Finally, we give the button a user-friendly name and click on it. Under the hood, Excel runs the VBA code, connects with the SQL server, runs the select query, retrieves the data from the database table, and outputs the results into the worksheet. Now you know how to connect the SQL server to Excel with the Visual Basic macro. You can use this knowledge for building custom applications for advanced data analysis in Excel. Connecting IBM SPSS statistics. IBM SPSS is one of the most used data analytics software packages. We will show how to import data from the database table into IBM SPSS Statistics version 20. The process is common for other versions and even other software from the IBM SPSS family. After the IBM SPSS is opened, go to File menu, find Open Database menu, and click the item named New Query. With that, you will open the database wizard that will help to set up the data import process. Now click Add ODBC Data Source button. The Open Database Connectivity, or ODBC, is an industry standard interface for accessing databases. In the ODBC Administration menu, click the Add button on the User Data Source tab, and then select the SQL Server option as the new data source. In the following window, you will be prompted to give a name to your connection settings, provide an optional description, and the name of your SQL server. The next window is for entering your SQL Server login credentials. Since we are using Windows authentication, we do not need to change anything here. The following window will allow you to choose the database that you want to use. And finally, you can change the default language of your database and log file paths. It's okay to leave the setting as it is and click Finish. Now you can test your connection by clicking Test Data Source button. This step is optional, but it is always good to make sure everything was made in the right way. Now you have your data source set, and it is time to use it for importing the data. Click the Next button in the Database Wizard. The wizard will prompt you to select the data. At this step, you can select individual columns. For that, you need to expand the list with the table name, select the column name, and click on the arrow. You can remove the column by clicking the backward arrow. If you want to import all columns, you can just select the table name, click the arrow, and all columns from that table will be selected. Optionally, you can filter the data you want to import. For that, the wizard has a window where you can construct a filter for selected columns. To give an example, we will construct an expression that filters stock prices. With this filter, only the rows with the stock prices greater than 100 will be imported. At the last step, you can instruct the wizard to convert selected variables to numeric and set the default width for the string variables, or find the minimum suitable width automatically. We will leave all settings as they are and click Next. The wizard will show the SQL select statement that it will use to retrace the data from the table. You may notice that the wizard constructed the where clause to reflect the filter that we created in the previous steps. Click Finish to launch the data import process. After the data is imported, you can examine the imported variables in the Variable View tab. To view the data, go to the Data view. All data is imported as expected. The data set contains only the records with the stock price greater than 100. One more thing we want to show here is the IBM SPSS Output Viewer window. This window shows the script that IBM SPSS software created with the help of the Database Wizard. Note that one field has a part of a database connection string. These string variables were used by the IBM SPSS to connect to our SQL server. The great thing is that the wizard helped us to create this string automatically. Now you know how to connect SQL Server Database to your IBM SPSS software. Connecting R. In this section, we will show how to use SQL Server Database table as the source of data in our R code. We will use Visual Studio 2017 for creating the code. The code that we will show does not depend on the framework in which it was created. In the Visual Studio, we will start a new project, the framework as a preset for an R project. So we only need to choose R project and click OK. Now we have an empty file open, ready to be filled with the code. The R version that we will use in this example is 3.51. We will need the Open Database Connectivity driver to connect with our SQL server. For that, we will use an R library named RODBC. To connect with the server, we will create a new connection instance with the help of ODBC driver connect function. We need to pass the connection string to this function as an argument. In the connection string, we indicate that we are going to use an SQL Server driver with Windows authentication. For that, we type in the name of the driver, name of the server, name of the database, and set the trusted connection variable to be true. Now we will instruct the R code to execute the select query on the server using the connection that we just created. The result of the query execution will be copied to the data frame. To ensure that we retrieve the data that we need, we place the print data frame command at the end of our code. This is it. Now we will execute the code to see the results. We can see in the output window that the content of the data frame is the same as we expected to see. So we successfully established the connection to our SQL server from the R code. Connecting Python. In this section, we will show how to connect SQL Server Database to Python. For the demonstration, we will use Visual Studio 2017 and Python version 3.6. In the Visual Studio, we will start a new project. From the list of presets, we will choose Python Application. We have to note here that the code that we will create is independent on the framework where it was made. At first, we will import a Python library for Open Database Connectivity named PyODBC. This is one of the most popular libraries for connecting with the database server. Unlike R language, Python does not have built-in data frames. In this example, we want to load data from the server into a data frame, so we will need a library named pandas to create the data frame. With the PyODBC function connect, we will create a new database connection. For that, we will pass the minimum required connection settings: name of the driver, name of the server, name of the database, and set the trusted connection parameter to yes, indicating that we will use Windows authentication to log into the server. Next, with pandas function read SQL query, we will instruct the Python code to create a data frame and fill it with the results of the SQL query executed through the created server connection. To ensure that the data frame will be filled with the data as we expect, we will add print data frame command to the end of the code. Now we are ready to execute the code. The code prints the results to the Python default output window and to the Visual Studio output window. We can see that the data frame is correctly filled with the table content and has the same column headers as the source table. That means the connection to the SQL server was successful. Congratulations! You completed the course and now know way more than others. Feel free to join our community at scanba.org and apply for the Scanba certificate. You deserve it!